let me tell you about a puzzle I never expected to craft. I love running one-on-one prologue sessions. Let's design a dungeon where every trap is disabled already. This was the moment I knew I had to be a dungeon master. But I recently was kind of brainstorming, thinking about things that could only work if you sort of had a co-DM. Like, it would be cool in the context of a heist, where it was established to be maybe like a two-shot, and each of the DMs would prep everything, but each would sort of take and run with two separate groups that then come together actually for the second of the two. So technically it would be a three-shot from the DM's perspective, and Group A is hired by some like wealthy benefactor in the city to go steal something valuable, and then the Group B is basically, maybe contacted slightly differently, but effectively they buy the same source. Because why would the, rich whomever that wants this thing stolen, why would they only go with one team? So that Group B plays, and then the other DM would sort of run that, and then the third session, the groups come together because they find out like they're all in the same room or whatever, stealing the same item, and they have to sort of undo and untangle what happened. But it'd be interesting to try to make adventures that are like, this is for two DMs, and sort of take that concept of a DM and sort of like add some more gameplay to it. I think there's something there that could be kind of cool to experiment with. When your players run from a fight, try not to let them see how excited you are. The first campaign I ever ran was a solo campaign. One of the mistakes I made was the first time she said she wanted to run away from a fight. It was in a cemetery. The villain was a big guy, 2 wolves on leashes, moving at her fast. I said, you can't run away. You can't do that. That's not fun. Then you're not playing. Yeah, I was new. What I should have said was, awesome. Which way do you run? Roll for initiative. Jump, roll, climb, hide. Maybe she ends up hiding in a dirt hole somewhere, stumbles into a hidden tomb. Or she poses as a member of a grieving family in the cemetery. Point is, when your players run, let them. And not just because you can deliver a chase scene and keep it satisfying as an encounter. Let them because they're giving you the best possible gift, a recurring villain. Do you know how hard it is to make recurring villains a thing in D&D? Everybody gets killed. If your players want to hand you a villain, let them. And remember, let's talk about character prologues. If you've never tried starting a campaign with one-on-one character sessions, just player and DM, I recommend you try it out. It gives the characters context in the world, and the players get a feel for their character before playing with other people. You can even introduce narrative threads you want to pull on later. Here are a few ideas to get you inspired. Your fighter was trained in the big city, but they don't speak about their trainer anymore. What was the exact moment of their falling out? Your druid went on a spiritual journey of discovery in order to choose their druidic circle. How did the forest challenge them that day? And what do they carry with them on their path even now? Your warlock has a dark deal with a patron spirit. What was that deal, and when was it struck? Or were they tricked by someone older and wiser? Give your players a prologue session. I bet they say it's the most fun they've had playing D&D. Terrain isn't necessary to play awesome D&D. You can use markers on a whiteboard, candy on a table, or just imagine things together. I build terrain because it's fun and because my players love it. Bad terrain can't hurt a good game, and good terrain can't fix a bad game. So in the spirit of fun, I created this initiative tracker that is also a rocky piece of terrain. It's XPS foam, acrylic paint, some sand for texture, some mossy pieces. It's magnetized, so I can use them apart or together. And if I spin it around, it looks like rocks. It's fitted for these plastic initiative trackers I found on Etsy, but you could really use anything on this that you want. Now when I use it in a scene, it sort of feels like it fits. I might even make a few others for different biomes like the desert, snow, city, really anywhere. And if you think it's fun, you should try building your own. Just remember, you don't need it. After all. Here's another encounter design for you. Let's give your players a moral dilemma. The players have traveled up the mountains to the mines, and they have business with the dwarven town there. But out front, they notice a thief hanging in a cage near the entrance. Apparently, these dwarves take thievery seriously. The penalty is to waste away in the hot sun. The thief begs for help. Send the dwarven chief out. I can convince him to free me. I'm going to die out here. Send the chief. Maybe your players don't care about this guy's fate. Maybe their blood runs cold as ice. Or maybe your players have stolen once or twice or a lot of times and they feel for the guy. Maybe they can convince the dwarves to reconsider. That will be tough. Or, what happened with my group, they decide to bust him out themselves. After picking the lock and approaching the thief, his form explodes into a ball of fire and smoke, hitting everyone in range of the cage. Turns out the thief escaped days ago. He left behind an illusion and a trap for the dwarven chief to find. All that's left behind is parchment, a sarcastic note for the owners of the mine, and a
veiled threat if they ever set foot in his hometown, and a hidden message for any rogues in the group. Maybe tracking this thief down is worthwhile after all. Let's do another encounter design. Let's say your players have heard stories about a goblin cave in the woods. Maybe somebody was even captured, so they're off to be heroes. Outside the cave, we'll have 2 or 3 guard goblins, but there's also a set of patrol goblins. Depending on how well the players stake out the area, they might only find the guards and miss the ones patrolling. The key is that the guards each have a horn. This will be important later. As the players fight their way into the cave, there's another goblin. He's either sleeping or hiding in wait. This is to give your players false hope, because really the horn was for 2 other groups. This tight passage here is on purpose. More on that in a second. So your players kill some goblins, storm in, but the horn was blown, calling in reinforcements. So before long, the patrolling goblins will come in behind them, and as they turn the corner, the enemy's behind everything. The strategic hobgoblins will shoot arrows down the hallway from their cover, and if one of your players decides to run down this choke point here without checking first, they find themselves falling into a well-disguised pit trap. Now the hobgoblins will fire down into it. Now if your players survive all of this, they will have earned their heroic moment, whatever that is, deeper in the cave. Let's talk encounter design. My players are traveling through the forest, and they have a magic instrument that belonged to a lich. It's a long story. Anyway, the lich is a bard, and he wants his instrument back. So his band creates an illusion that the group has entered the Feywild, are now trapped, and have to trade a magic item, one specific magic item, to get out. Bards are disguised as 2 fairies and a satyr. The satyr does the talking. This crazy owl fox creature, it's really just a deer. Let's add this flight platform, just in case the satyr needs some distance, but the drop is an illusion too. And if the players properly inspect any of the illusion, they can see straight through it, fight the real bad guys. Let's build out another Feywild encounter. This forest is the domain of a Fey dragon, and your characters weren't invited and are greeted by combat with fairies and shambling mounds. For fun, have the last people to try and make their way through the forest half digested inside the shambling mounds. Anyway, the real show begins when all the action causes the Fey dragon to show up. After some posturing, after she talks herself up, she was a member of the Spring Court after all, the dragon will notice the magic items the party is carrying. She adores the taste of magic, so she eats the magic from them, instantly reducing the items to common status. You should pick out the items beforehand, based on what the characters use that also is high in magic. So that's terrible for the players, it's unfair even, but this dragon will offer their magic back, all of it, in exchange for something more delicious, spoken truth from each of them, something shocking that maybe they hadn't even admitted to themselves before. If they play along, the dragon will be fed for ages, and of course will return the magic she ate. If they don't, well, it could have been worse. The players could have lost their names or even a lifetime in the madness of the Feywild. At least they got out with a story they can tell. Let's do another encounter design. This time, let's go to town and set up a larger possible story arc. This one's mostly social. It starts with some kids hustling people on the street. There's a crowd gathered, and it should be pretty easy for your world-weary players to spot them as cheats. We'll stick these guards nearby, so maybe your players will consider them when this next part happens. The kids should beckon the players over, offer them a game or two, follow a ball in a cup, pick a card from a deck, but without magic or high insight, these kids will cheat them out of money. If your players confront them, kids run down this alley, players give chase. The kids turn, threaten the players, maybe a few other kids are ready to back them up to really put your players in a tough spot. But not for long, Granny will approach from the street and reprimand her kids. She's their caretaker at the orphanage in town. She apologizes for them, everything ends peacefully. But there's no orphanage. She's really a hag, and she's using children to do her bidding. And now, based on whatever the players did, she can judge whether they are due a future reward or punishment. With a hag, it's hard to say which would be worse. Often a door is the main encounter of the night. There's a temple door blocking your party's way. The stonework is aged and cracked in places. They push and it budges, but it doesn't fully open. Instead, whoever tried to push it open has to roll to avoid flaming radiant damage coming from the door. Okay, so is it trapped? The rogue can't find anything, except it looks like some of the cracks go all the way through to the room on the other side. Everyone in front of the door has to save against a noxious gas that seems to have come through the cracks themselves. Maybe it's the extra cough or sneeze that gives it away, because it's not a magic door after all. It's a squirrely magic user on the other side, someone who has experienced enough magic doors to try and impersonate one. Once through, I'm guessing your party will want to have a word with them. Have you ever painted yourself before? I was in need of a profile picture and wanted to get creative with it, so I asked my wife to design a figure for me in Hero Forge that is just me, and I printed it, made it a little bit of a larger scale, kind of statue size is what it looks like in the video, and then last night, streamed it. The process took a little over 3 hours to clean it up, prime it, base it, paint it. I feel pretty good about it. It's kind of a challenge, to be honest, because the paint scheme is different, the modern colors, the modern look, but I think it came out pretty well, so probably start seeing this pop up on my profiles, my avatars here soon. Puzzle encounters are difficult to get right. Some of them take more work than others to explain to players. There's a puzzle in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything that actually inspired me to make it. This board is foam with lots of little hand-cut bricks, and my best effort to carve and paint out the letters on each square to be readable. It matches the book, and depending on which square you land on, different magical effects could zap you. For instance, standing on this square is the N in Conjuration. Then you might have to dodge Poison Spray, or here, the B in Abjuration. Maybe you get banished into the other room. Just an idea. All you have to do is get from one end of the room to the next. Choose your steps wisely. Running this type of puzzle with terrain is super fun, even if it's less modular than most of what I build. It's not necessary, but hey, what terrain is? If you like this idea, maybe sometime I'll show you how I expanded on this idea on the other side of the board, made a slightly more advanced version for my players. That one will take a bit more explanation. When you introduce your players to a room, make sure you give them hooks. It's tempting to say, it's dark, stone walls everywhere, you see nothing, you hear nothing. It's counterintuitive a little bit. As a DM, you want your players to explore the area and learn for themselves. The less you tell them about the area, the harder it is for them to come up with their next steps. So instead, if you said, it's dark, but there's something large leaning up against one wall. You feel stone beneath your feet, but you feel a cold air coming from somewhere. And in the silence, you think you hear the sound of running water nearby. These hooks give them things they can now do. Each player can investigate something that seems so much more concrete than before, and you really haven't told them much more about the room. It's so much easier to learn more about what you already know than to try and find out something when you know nothing. Add a small hook to each session that's specific to one player. The druid sees an animal walking with a limp. How did that happen? The rogue spots an old door with a shiny new padlock. What's inside? The cleric meets someone scared to death of their god. Why? Your players will feel so cool every time something like this happens. Relationships in D&D are a great source of drama, and it's Valentine's Day, so here's a story. One day, my sorcerer used some particularly dark magic she had found, as one does, and shortly after, she met a mysterious figure in her dreams. This charming person, Nick, said he was able to see her when she used the dark magic, like she called out to him. He's impressed with her. Perhaps together, they can free him from this plane he's trapped on. Thus began a many months-long affair in her dreams, getting to know one another. Nick was actually short for Nicodemus, and while he was trapped, it was because he was a notorious devil seeking to return to the material plane. Nick eventually found his moment and used her to escape. He even seemed sorry she was hurt by him. He cared for her in his own selfish way. Nick also rallied a legion of demons, nearly destroyed a city, and the sorceress led the party to kill him with fire. But that's a story for another time. The point is, relationships in D&D can be fun. And that's because if you're a crafting DM, listen, put your unfinished work on the damn table. Fight with gray primed monsters on half-completed terrain. Your players will love all of it. Let the game be bigger than your collection of stuff. Let's design an encounter where goblins are bastards. Seriously, screw these little guys. That's how we want players to feel while fighting them. Your players are out in the wilderness and come across an improvised bear trap in the tall grass. I might roll the goblin's survival against the passive perception of the person leading the group, see if they step in it or notice it. Either way, the goblins will then jump out and attack, maybe even with surprise, and then back down into the grass to hide. Players won't know how many there are, or at any point where the goblins precisely are. They'll be swinging wildly, effectively attacking only with disadvantage. Hopefully your players get crafty and start holding attacks for when the goblins pop out, like whack-a-mole. If the one player did step on the trap, the goblins will focus on them. Otherwise, they try to take down one player at a time. Goblins don't fight fair. They use every advantage they have. Once fewer than half of the goblins are up, have them turn and run, screaming away. If you're lucky, this draws the players further into the forest into, you guessed it, an ambush with the goblin boss. Seriously, screw goblins. Don't be afraid to let your players spot traps. Whether you have a rogue searching or not, it shows they're aware of their environment, and that's a great thing. It's fun to spring a trap, but your players will feel like geniuses disarming one. And hey, while they're focused in, have a monster sneak up on them. Let's talk campaign one-shots for a minute. If you have a player or two that can't make it, or even just as a change of pace, tell a side story in your world using a one-shot. I call them side shots. Here are a couple of ideas to show you what I mean. Remember that desperate town from the notice board? The one your players couldn't be bothered to visit? Well, they're being attacked by a bridge troll, and no help is on the way. Time to pick out a commoner, a makeshift weapon, and try your best. Or, how about the epic heroes of legend, the ones all the statues and magic items are named for? Play out their final fight against the Lich, the Beholder, or the Dragon. Heck, all three. Or run a heist starring your campaign's recurring villains, or even the characters your players love to hate. Make them relatable or really amp up the collateral damage. Maybe it even leads into your next big arc. The point is, gameplay is the best way to flesh out your world and tell your lore. Like that last one, the heist. I think I want to go plan that one for my campaign right now. Try using a skill check as the DC when your players are following a leader. The other night I was running a game. My players were navigating a booby trap mine in the Feywild, because D&D is awesome. The monk led the way and was able to spot where it was safe to walk. So as he led them through, I asked for his acrobatics check. To follow him, that became the DC. He rolled well. Following his lead was hard. Traps were triggered. This was really situational. It's not something that will always work. But if you ever find yourself in a situation where your players are in the Feywild, stuck in a time loop, and adventuring in a wish stone mine, and every misstep causes a hidden bomb to go off and the cave to collapse, only for them to blow up and try again and again, basically played for laughs, in that case it worked really well.
To be clear, I like a lot of this. I think I'll be able to use a lot of it. Clean it up and like make it the plan. Just finished up the ancient black dragon fight with my party of 5 13th level using the custom stuff that I added, and went awesome. Here's the best advice I have for character backstories. The campaign should be the most important part of your character's life. Don't write the important parts into the backstory. Write the failures, write the roadblocks, and write the flaws that are holding them back. Then in the campaign, you get to overcome those flaws, work through those roadblocks, and your character can succeed. Avoid boring combat. Keep it exciting. When your players stop making decisions and it's just about hit points, combat gets boring. Add a new challenge after the first round of combat to force your players to rethink their game plan. Let's say your players are fighting some drunks in a tavern, and they're winning. No decisions, it's getting boring. Maybe one of the drunks grabs a waitress as a human shield. Lay down your weapons, he says, or she gets it. Or maybe your players spot someone outside, running off with the horses and the loot from the last dungeon. Is this fight just a distraction? Or maybe one of the drunks pulls out an alchemist flask. He chugs it down and starts breathing fire all around. Now the tavern is burning, and everyone's in real danger. Just an example. Decisions make combat exciting. And bonus points if you can use all these ideas at once. I make props for my D&D games. This one's a notice board. A while ago, I textured one to sort of look like wood. I blue tack on the town announcements and requests for help, like this. Or here's another one. I have a whole stack of stuff like this that I've kept. But in my next session, I wanted to hang things up on a stone wall. My board needed an upgrade, so I made this. This is XPS foam, textured in blocks of about 4 inches by 8 inches. Then I used some texture paste in between the bricks to give that look of mortared stone. I added magnets at a few key locations, like 50 key locations. I painted it up, and now here it is, in use for my game. This session, my players established a new home base in a cathedral in a town that's been overrun by a coven of witches, because D&D is awesome. I'm pretty happy with the new board. Now I need to do the other side, but that's a project for another day. Here's a question just for fun. Player or DM, I want to hear 3 numbers. First, number of players.
First, number of players in your game. Second, current level. Third, how long have you been playing? I'll go first. Okay, how about you guys?
The first big reveal of the campaign that they sort of uncovered, I knew was going to be that their guild leader was a lich. What I didn't know is when they were going to figure it out, but I knew that I wanted it to be something that they could figure out sort of on their own. So I gave them a puzzle that required them all to sort of collaborate. This was 5 players. I made props. The props had basically hidden codes on them, only because the group had sort of self-identified as really liking puzzles. So I gave them that puzzle knowing that there was every possibility that they would never figure it out. They're going to basically control the pace of this campaign. Whenever they figure this out, I just have to be ready to respond. So I gave them those puzzles at about 4th level. So I knew that it was entirely possible that they would find out, even while in the guild hall, right, that their guild master was a lich and be like 5th level or 6th level, and like, what are they going to do about it? Players did eventually uncover that. It took them about a year, and that was a really fun moment, definitely a highlight of my dungeon mastering career. When it comes to early campaign design, in my experience, it's totally fine. You sort of look at the first mini arc as sort of the training wheels. Not training wheels like people don't know how to play. Training wheels because they literally don't have their footing in the game yet. Like they haven't found their balance, and they don't really even know what they can and can't do. My games are usually open-ended, open world, there's always lots of options. But a lot of it is fairly curated at the beginning to make sure that everybody's, okay, point proven. So, what's the early game about?
12 backstories in 60 seconds. Rangers. The ship was your father's. It's somehow poetic to use it now to chase him down. Your guild maps the veil between the planes. So why is it disintegrating? People think you're crazy hunting these creatures. But if you don't, the shapeshifter will kill again. Next, fighters. Your debts in the boxing ring have racked up. This hero gig pays, right? You were too slow once and you lost your family. You'll never be caught slow again. The best fighters are personally knighted by the king, which is the perfect chance to finally get your revenge. Barbarians. Your tribe's minds were overtaken by vampires. Now just the smell of blood and you rage. Someone in a yellow hood took your world from you. Eventually, you're bound to take out the one who did it. You don't blame your bounties for running. It's because they've heard about your brand of justice. Finally, rogues. Becoming notorious is risky business, but now the world will find your twin before it's too late. Working for a magician taught you to be charming and to use misdirection while you swipe their gold. As an assassin, you can blend in anywhere. I mean, who's suspicious of the oldest guy in the room? You know what? I have a minute. 3 ideas for Warforged Eldritch Knight players. You were crafted out of magic armor once used by the knight's most trusted fighter. The alchemist forged your body from metals in the Underdark, and you feel a need to return. You were woken up for a reason. Once the job is done, what if you don't want to go back to sleep?
If you want your terrain to do this, yeah. Here's how to magnetize your terrain. We'll use these 2 blocks. First, going to use a stack of magnets just to make an indentation in the foam where I want them to be, about at each corner. Now I'll use a clay sculpting tool or whatever else and dig out the circle. I'll add hot glue into the hole, place the magnet, and then add hot glue on top as well. This will provide the hold to keep the magnet from flying out of the foam. I do the same thing to the other spots. Once they're all set, I'll use these magnets to press indentations to the other piece of foam and do it all again. The hot glue deadens the pull of the magnets on either end, so you can be sure they won't pull each other out. There's that sound. Just try to keep the magnets oriented the same way, and you'll be great. Players don't actually do anything on their own. Players want to react to things that are happening or that have happened. Reacting is so much easier than acting. Acting, it's a blank slate. You're saying, what do you do? People just sit there going, But if somebody busts in through the door and starts swinging a weapon around, okay, reacting, I have all these ideas already about what I'm going to do about that. So we provide the action, and then the players provide the reaction. Players riffing on that. Really cool, like player insight. The DM can riff on that. And this is like the game. Then drop off. We've been doing the same thing too often. What do? New action. That creates a new opportunity for players to have a reaction. What are they going to react to this time? But I think you can get a lot of leeway out of this pattern. This sort of rhythm is how I design almost all of my sessions. I'm a DM. I'm not really a player. I don't really get to have the joy of being mad at dice for treating me poorly, because I I roll like shit all the time anyway. But people like when I do, so I can't exactly get upset. If I get upset, it's got to be because it's like a joke that I'm upset. Like, why aren't I winning? Why can't my bad guys hit you guys? I'm so upset. But it doesn't bother me. Being a DM at a certain point is kind of like being in the casino. It's like, oh, did I miss? Darn it. On a long enough timeline, the house wins. I don't have to win every swing or block every hit. There's always more enemies, always more dragons.
First sorcerers. Each day the energy builds inside you. If you don't find out why, you might explode. Your tattoos shift and change. As you grow, you gain more of them. Why? You know your powers like you know yourself. They speak to you. They have ideas.
Bards.
Most days you build tables in your shop, but you'll pick up a weapon to protect your hometown. Your father's book of poems has been true every day. You're just afraid to read the last stanza. One day the crowd will smile and sing your songs loud. Maybe then the ritual spell will finally work. Druids. You know dark wizards can kill druids with one powerful word, but kill the lich first and you become an archdruid. There's a traitor in the forest. Can these city weirdos help you find the circle responsible? You'll likely live forever. Might as well help with their mortal problems. Best not get too attached to them though. Wizards. You collected interesting plants together. Now a widow, they are your spell components. You have big ideas and want to live forever, and you'll do it ethically. Promise. In your dream, just you and your spellbook survive. Time to save as much magic as you can.
Everyone's talking about these D20 popcorn buckets from the new movie. Let's build one out of foam. Using pictures, I'd say each side is 4.5 inches long. For the structure, after a few failed attempts, I just taped the triangles together to hold a loose form. Then, holding them in place, I glued it together. Next, I added foam core and drew in the scales. A lot of scales. I cut the logos and numbers out of foam and glued them in thin slices on each side. For the corners and edge scaling, I tried a few ideas before settling on something pretty close to the original. So much foam cutting. Then Mod Podge, black paint, gray, silver, red and yellow, a little dry time, and here it is. And yes, of course, the lid is magnetized. But I lied, I didn't make one of these. I made two. This one's to give away. I'll pick a name from the comments. If you need a prompt, tell me about a role in the game where you'd want a big D20 like this. And don't forget to follow for more crafting and D&D videos. There are 2 key questions your game should answer in the first few sessions of a new campaign. Why these people? Why now? I get questions a lot about the minis and tiles I use in my videos. Most of my minis are from either WizKids or Reaper. I like the Reaper mini bases. They give a clean look. These are metal minis, which usually cost a bit more. They're weighty, and I like them, but on the table you can hardly tell the difference. And these are 3D printed from Warforged designs that my players made. These cobblestone tiles are all hand-drawn, just pen into XPS foam. Then these have wood planks on one side and a temple floor on the other. For these cave tiles, the walls are magnetized both to the tile and to each other. I followed an awesome guide by Tabletop Witchcraft on YouTube for those. He also made a guide for these temple tiles, though the walls are my design. Finally, my sandstone tiles. Pretty much magnets everywhere, holding it all together. So, is there anything you'd like to hear more about? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see what I can do. 12 backstories in 60 seconds. First, clerics. Charlatans control people with religion, so you make a habit of exposing these false prophets. The texts are unclear. It's either you perish for your party, or they do it for you. You're a believer now, which is wild. The real cleric, whose life you stole, has been dead for years. Monks. You follow the path of past monks, fight their spirits and learn from them. Who's next? In combat, you find your zen. Listen close, and you can still hear your family's voices. You trained with hundreds to protect heroes. If you protect them, will they save the world? Paladins. The script on your family sword is unreadable. Now, at war, you can read your name and instructions. One touch and you see their final moments through their eyes. All it costs you each time is your life. They pledge to help on your journey, but in your vision, only you live to face the beast. Warlocks. Your patron speaks to you in dreams, but now you dream more than you're awake. It's never the instructions that bother you. It's that you hear them in your own voice. You know their attempt at justice will fail. It won't let it happen. You've been trying for years. I'd love to run a seafaring campaign, a game that's split between managing the ship and exploring uncharted islands. Like Star Trek, but fantasy, with a dash of Wind Waker. That would be a blast. Trying to make a hole. I have a game that I'm running where we just fell down a well. perfectly fitting time to make some new terrain, or in this case, experiment with a new way of making terrain and see whether it would actually work. The attempt is to kind of make a cutaway place that people could be climbing down or up. This just kind of was born out of having these kind of weird pieces of foam. Well, I could probably do something with it. I want to Mod Podge them. My hope is that that will provide more strength and hold. That is what we're going to attempt to do.
Roleplay isn't voices, dressing up, or speaking in first person. Roleplay is making decisions your character would make that you yourself wouldn't. You wouldn't put the party in jeopardy for some stolen gold, but your rogue would. You'd never dream of arguing with a noble for disparaging the sun god, but your cleric just can't help themselves. Roleplaying is decisions. Everything else, if it's fun for you, will come in time.
They were exploring a dungeon for some other reason, and they came across just a bare, empty room with a single chair in it. And in my brain, it was like a watch post or something. But to the players, they were convinced it's something else, because it was just a chair in the room, nothing else. And like, maybe it's a trap. So they spent half an hour trying to throw things at it. I was like, nothing's happening. I was like, okay, but what if we move the chair and take it with us? I'm like, you can do that. Nothing's going to happen because it's a chair, but...
It's a blessing and a curse. Whenever we describe something, it has meaning. The only way that literally the only technique I have to manage that is if there's something that I want to call out, I make sure there's 4 or 5 other things I'm also calling out. Try to disguise it a little bit.
It is the joyous of having players look way deeper into something. On my iPad, I have like a list of monster encounters that I'm like, this would be perfect when they go here. And this is what they interact with. And they're like, we'll go the other way. I'm like, okay. Keep talking. I'm going to have to think of something on the fly.
I like to make it clear, especially when this happens. And, depending on player decisions, I'll let them know at the end, like, just so you guys know, here's like 4 encounters that you guys either bypassed or really clever about. The stuff that, like, that's okay. That there's all these kind of things that could change depending on their choices is essential to making it feel real.
Here's a fun project I did for my players. I found these plastic displays. They're called claunches. I bought a bunch. I painted up a duplicate of my player's mini, and I created a scene out of some little bits and foam and a tea light under the base, so it actually lights up. This display is for Grumbach, the half-orc fighter, but I've made others. What do you think? For new D&D players, it's easier to say, my character picks the lock on the door, versus I pick the lock on the door. Eventually, they'll get to here. Let's start here. Here's the miniature display for my bard. His name is Alfir. Actually, he lost his name to the Fae. Corfir comes from a small town in my world named Refuge. For this display, first I made a duplicate mini, a duet partner. Then I built out the base of wait a minute.
Cloche.
The cloche. The floor is foam, individual planks. The rest I 3D printed and painted up. Since the player left our group, Corfir also retired from adventuring. He goes up on the shelf with his old buddy Grumbach. We miss you, Corfir. So, what do you think?
Here's a low-level adventure. Screams from the edge of town bring your players running. A half-dozen goblins are attacking a family near the river. They want the flowers the little girl found. You'll be surprised how combat changes when your players are protecting people. Plus, how did the goblins get past the perimeter guard? Turns out the goblins were following instructions. Tracking them leads your players to a dingy cave outside of town. Inside, they hear sizzling sounds like cooking bacon. With some light and a little luck, they notice ooze dripping from the ceiling before it permanently damages their weapons and armor. Even swinging a sword at the ooze rusts it beyond repair. Who would willingly spend any time down here? Turns out it's a young hag, shunned by the town, and the players interrupt her ritual. She's responsible for all the trouble, but she's in way over her head now. She asks for help as mud and magma mephits emerge and fly around the room. Will your players help, or leave her to her own demise? If they choose to save her, maybe she's even a valuable friend for the campaign.
Let me tell you about a puzzle I never expected to craft. In the early game, my players saved a little girl from goblins, so she drew a picture for them. Aww. Around the edges, she wrote a note in a language she said her mother taught her. She said it meant forever. We went on with the session. But less than an hour later, one of the players, the druid, had sorted out what each of the letters must translate to. They used pattern recognition to do it, which is amazing. So earlier in this campaign, they ran through this puzzle board I built based on an idea in Tasha's. You step on a type of magic, you get hit. Well, then they saw it a second time, but it was harder. Same gimmick, but the floor was covered in this other language, the one they knew 5 characters of. I thought they would just run through, take some damage, and have a laugh. But instead, they brute forced the whole board. They solved it, the whole thing. Incredible. Yes, they are amazing players, and no, you can't have them. That's how I found out they liked puzzles, so that's what I gave them next. My players found these crazy artifacts. A wizard made this strange clockwork skull. Oh, there's a hole here. But why would it make a light? I have the best players. She shipped this back just so I could show you guys. This is Jax, the Tabaxi rogue, currently outsmarting the city guard. Using another mini in the display really adds something to it, I think. I was also excited to use miniature leaves for the first time. And of course, inside the building is what the rogue is really after. Looking at this now, I think I should add some wanted posters to the walls. So that's Grumbach, Porphyr, now Jax. Only 2 more party members to go. I would love to run a game set in a magic school. A medieval school, an institute, set in some coastal city maybe. I have so many ideas for that. I'm a crafting DM, and I like to take inspiration from things I find at the dollar store. Here's what I just picked up. I finally grabbed one of those toy houses to experiment with. Maybe a quick building. We'll see. I could be crazy, but when I look at this bath mat, it looks like a field or a garden with rows of dirt. We'll come back to that idea. Wood pieces, maybe a raft or small boat. I like the recessed area on this one. This plastic umbrella canopy thing, I think with some texturing it could be a really interesting roof. Could be a gazebo. These brush heads. If I pull out these tufts and spray paint them, I bet they will be a convincing field. Corn or tall grass maybe. I'll use them with the bath mat. I almost missed these pens. Tell me that's not a crystal ball or some weird item in a wizard's tower or a magic shop. So that's what I found this week. Now I just have to make something with it. Let me tell you about the first big mistake I made in the first real D&D campaign I ever ran. It's the first session, and I have a plan. The players are off on a simple task in the forest, and I thought I would interrupt them with a goblin patrol. They would search out the goblin camp out of concern for their town, and have a big fun boss fight. Okay, so the players spotted the goblin patrol, and the sorcerer cast sleep. It was a good roll, and there were only 2 goblins. Okay, it's an easy fight then. Now they can... The barbarian picked up the sleeping goblins by their ankles and hurled them off into the trees. Oh, wow. So now I guess they finished their task in the forest, went back to town, and thought nothing of the goblins or their camp. So the moral of the story is the goblin should have prevented the players from completing their task. Instead of assuming the players would do what I thought, I should have put the game in their way. Now I know it's not the most important terrain for me to work on. There's lots of other stuff I could use in my games right now. But sometimes I just need to vibe and glue some bricks into place. I like hand drawing my world maps. I use micron pens and a thicker textured paper. When I give my players a world map, it's whatever region is accessible to them in my game. Whenever I run a new game, I add another region to my world and fill it out, and they all connect like this, which makes me really happy. I had one day to build an Elder Brain encounter. Luckily, I was able to find some neat stuff at the dollar store. First, I carved up half of a styrofoam ball into something vaguely brain-shaped. For the base, a sign that was designed for, let me check, a baby announcement. The wavy edges on these foam pads are perfect for the rim of the pool. I hot glued around the curve. Not fun or simple, but it worked. Next, I sculpted the brain out of DAS air dry clay. Then Mod Podge, black paint, and dry time. For the room the Elder Brain is in, I cut black foam core board to fit, added wavy edges, and glued on squares to make a pattern. Some paint, and glossy effects for the brain. Luckily, I already have these tentacles. In the end, here's a dollar store encounter build in one day. What do you think? How would your party fare against an Elder Brain as old as the gods? As a player, I roll these dice. But as a dungeon master, I only roll with these. I've been using this as a notice board prop, but it's just brown paint and blue tack. Time for an upgrade. I decided on a width for the wood boards and then cut down some 1/4 inch XPS foam at about that size. I'll texture with a rolled up aluminum foil ball first, then take them outside and use a wire brush for a while to get that wood grain look. Then this clay sculpting tool for more exaggerated lines. I used hot glue to get them in place and then dug out small holes where the nails would be. I'll stick magnets in some of the nail holes, spread out a bit on the board. Next, I Mod Podge the board and add a few coats of brown paint. Finally, some dry brushing, just light tan and off-white. And we can get some announcements up. And if you want to see how I made the stone board on the other side of this, I'll drop a link below in the comments. And let me know, have you ever considered using a real notice board prop like this? If you're a DM, try rewriting monster stats into your notes. I started by writing simple stats onto note cards. Then I moved to digital notes, which at least makes searching easier because, yeah. Now I use Dale Kingsmill's format. Her YouTube channel is Monarch's Factory. It goes big numbers, skills, defense, and then offense. I tend to use stats in this order anyway. But really, writing something out helps me understand it. Plus, my notes aren't official. I can change anything I want. And that's where things get really fun. When your players walk up to a notice board, they're looking for hooks. It's an opportunity to let your world speak directly to the players. I like using an actual prop, so there's really a board with papers to read through. That's what these are. Each of these has gone on a board of mine and shown to my players in one way or another. Sometimes it's a direct hook, like a wanted poster or a job posting. Other times it's more about setting the tone, world building in little pieces of paper. And then I'll toss in something subtle, a simple clue to something larger. Probably nobody will notice it, but maybe they will. In a way, this gives you a sense of my DM style. Some of it's pretty obvious, some is to establish the world, and somewhere in there is something I really, really hope you'll find. Introduce your villains early, and make sure players understand the threat they pose. Try things other than direct confrontation, or else your players might take out your villains too soon. For instance, you could use necromancy. Have your villain speak through the mouths of the dead to provoke the party. Every enemy they defeat is another chance for a villainous monologue. Or try imposters. Your players fight the villain, but each time they discover it's just another henchman disguised as the big bad. And now, the real villain knows just a little bit more about the party's skills. Or maybe a puzzle. Your villain could send letters to taunt the players. The villain is known to them. If only they could decode his secret messages and find him in time. I was just on a game show. Megaphone Man invited Dicebrain and I to compete in a game of fantasy or reality. Basically, you hear the name of a person or a place and have to guess based on the description whether it's real or fantasy. Kind of like this.
Abramoch. Reality description. Nestled in the Caradon region, Abramoch village is absolutely picturesque. The local artisans still blow glass in the traditional fashion and teach classes on their techniques to tourists passing through. Now, the fantasy. This city, also known as the Mount of Leaping Flames, is the only city on the layer of Phlegathos in the Nine Hells.
Go play along, see if you can outdo us. Then sub to Megaphone Man on YouTube and TikTok. He's putting out some fun D&D content.
I think my favorite part of this game is that you think you need to specify for us which description is real and which one is fantasy. Because the one of them is like, there's this bridge that's really clean shape, and the other one is like, beyond the Fey realm.
I never read all the Harry Potter books until I wanted to run a one-shot in that world. I set the game during the first semester after the war, when the school is open again. I devised my own list of spells and drew out a map of the school. The players were all in detention, all in the same room when one poor kid fell terribly ill. They had 2 days to find out why, or take the blame for it and be expelled. It was a bunch of fun, and I even included hints at a larger mystery hidden in the school. It was a lot of effort to put into a one-shot, but I was able to introduce D&D to people who might not have ever tried to play it together, except when it dove into lore that they already loved, and that made it worth all the effort. How do you run surprise in D&D? However you want, of course. But if you want to run it like 5th edition says, well, if a monster sneaks up on your party, roll its stealth. Compare that to your players' passive perception scores. Now call for an initiative roll. For the first round, anyone whose perception was lower is surprised. No action, no bonus action, no movement on their turn. They can react, but only at the end of their turn. After that first round, it's all back to normal. That's it. That's surprise. It can get trickier, but this will get you through most situations. Sometimes I save or even create duplicate miniatures and paint them up for special encounters. Like these here. These are knights with flame swords. They were once echoes of a ghost life, and the players had to defeat them all to release the ghost spirit. Or this tiefling kid. I have a bunch of him. He's a kid with godlike powers, at least in his own pocket dimension. He can be as many people as he needs to be, but only in there. And here's a treasure golem, or 3 sizes of one. Let's just say you might not want to steal cursed gold from dwarves. I hear it tends to duplicate. Just like my minis tend to. 5 years ago, I had never really crafted anything. I barely played D&D back then. But I don't think you need terrain or even miniatures to run a great game. Crafting all of this made me happy, and I think made my game more accessible to new players. For me, it's less about the craft. It's more about the moments they let me build in a game. Each piece was made for a key encounter. Looking at these now, they are totems to 5 full years of games. Let's design a dungeon where every trap is disabled already. Your players arrive to steal the treasure. You know the one, it's super important. The way in is easy. An open stone door, a few weird statues. The spikes on the floor tiles are all exposed and easy to avoid. Even the burial chamber, while a bit damp, has the treasure out in the open. But once they take it, everything changes. They hear gears turning in the walls as water rapidly fills the tomb. The spikes are hidden. Who remembers which tiles to avoid? The statues are in the corners. Only moments to solve the puzzle before the water reaches the ceiling. After all of that, the treasure's a fake. Attached is a note from the thief who beat them to the tomb. Nice work. Up for a real challenge now? When I'm running a session, I listen for the gaps. The players are engaged with ideas, talking to each other and NPCs. But at some point, it starts to get quiet, like when popcorn is almost done popping, just a few seconds between the kernels. Then, I trigger the next event. A new character walks in, or there's a sound in the next room. Maybe an NPC asks the party a divisive question. With a handful of events in mind, I can keep a session popping, or engaging. You know what I mean. I have a fun announcement. I'm building some terrain for one of the stages at Gen Con this year. My friends Nate and Mark are running a game featuring Magic Sword and Metavari. It's going to be epic. So, it's a wasteland setting. I already have a desert board, so that's a lot of work out of the way. The goal is wagons in a big race. Think Mad Max by way of high fantasy. Thinking 4 or 5 carts, depending on time. Maybe modular? We'll see. I'll post videos throughout the process of designing and building each cart. Wish me luck. Let's build an arcane boat. something a wizard would be proud to fly in. Okay, so this is a crystal that will be suspended, pulling it along. Over here's more of a wizard's study and stairs going up to the navigation deck with a force field. We'll get to that. I like to use paper to make templates since it more easily curves around the pieces than my foam will. With a basic structure, I'll cover it in long planks. I think this banding will be a brass or copper color because it's a fancy boat. As a reminder, this build is for Gen Con, which is coming up here soon. This is one of a number of builds I'm completing in a pretty short span of time, and I'm streaming all of it on Twitch. So come visit me over there if you want to hang out, talk crafts, and D&D. Still more to this build, but all the fun stuff is next. I think my favorite is this little guy holding the wizard's book. I love running one-on-one prologue sessions at the start of a campaign. Here's a fun one I ran. Cade Goodbarrel, the halfling bard. He started his prologue fighting off pirates on a ship, sneaking up on them, and looking like a character straight out of an adventure novel. Then he snapped out of it. He was actually a cook at the local tavern. It was just a daydream, but he still had to roll initiative. This time, he had to cook up and serve food, round by round, until his shift ended. It was a little silly, but it fit the character. And after playing that game for years, after Cade has traveled through time, through the astral sea, turned to stone and back again, this character used to daydream all of this stuff while manning the grill. I can't recommend Prologue Sessions enough. My players found this mysterious wooden box in a dungeon. I made it out of foam, but it's textured and painted like wood. Inside are old letters written from a father to a son. There are strange characters on the lid. Neat little box, but one of the legs in the box is loose. Why would they? Oh. It's a false bottom. Some more clues down here. More of these characters. Okay, this might take some time. I love the idea of a game set in a small town where every NPC matters. Imagine a town small enough that every character has goals, flaws, and an opinion on what's happening in the game. I'm inspired by shows like Twin Peaks. There's also a German show called Dark that comes to mind. No question, it would be a lot of work, but I think it could be an amazing game. Here's a prop and a puzzle I'm really proud of. The scroll wrap itself is from Etsy, but what I designed are the Bard song scrolls within it. And this really stretched me since I'm no musician. But there are 6 songs here, each unique and about a different part of my world. The Bard who wrote these songs in my game hid secrets about the world in these songs. It's a little complicated to dig into here, but each of these pages holds about 4 puzzles to solve. Just don't bother playing them because I guarantee you they won't sound any good. Getting a craft to the point that it's all painted black is so satisfying. After all the detail work, finding all those little ideas and touches, the black base coat ties it together. This is the moment it stops being a bunch of assembled pieces. It's not painted yet, but it's already become one complete new thing. If you think about game design as much as I do, I have to recommend this talk by Ken Levine.
When I say a star, these are the characters that really matter, and the question is, I don't want to overwhelm the player with 1,000 characters that matter because you just won't be able to track them.
In this talk, he explores the idea of narrative design through player choices. They even tested these ideas using a D20 system, just dice and paper, before developing any game with it.
So passion is what a star cares about relative to the actions of the player, meaning relative to the things the player can impact upon.
He talks about selecting key NPCs and giving them passions, and allowing players to help or hinder those passions to determine their game experience.
When you pass certain thresholds on that, Frank will start doing stuff for you or doing stuff against you.
It gave me a lot to think about. Maybe you'll like it too. It's on YouTube. Just search Ken Levine Welcome. I'll also drop a link below. I finished crafting my arcane flying boat for Gen Con. It's made almost entirely out of foam, with a couple of found and 3D printed bits. It has magnets that go... I love that sound. There's only one problem. We need a proper wizard to fly this ship. I want to paint up a mini to go with the boat, and I thought you guys could help me pick one. Comment below with the mini you think would be the best fit for this ship. And while we're looking at wizards pulled from my gray pile of shame, if you're going to be at Gen Con, let me know. I'm bringing this and other terrain to Gen Con for the actual play, dressed for Fantasy 2. I'm still building things for the event, and I try to stream on TikTok Live and over on Twitch. So if you want to follow along, come check out the stream. Alright, back to the crafting table. As crafting dungeon masters, it's all about the world building. And also... But yeah, it's all about the world building, really. Who serves under the hag? Who fights for the hag? Could certainly be some sort of a coven, you know, the sisters. Then they could basically kind of get a tour of these different types of hags, which would be kind of fun. Minions of the hag to be citizens of the town who are sleeping. Wear rats would be a fun idea. I'm thinking of gargoyles mostly because those could be like pulled straight off of buildings. I kind of don't mind scarecrows, honestly. Like, I like the idea of them sort of repositioning and following the group. Maybe it's the they never move if you're watching them type of thing. But anytime you turn away and you're not watching them, they can do anything. I'm thinking some sort of flesh golems. I'm thinking like ants patrolling to keep the hags half of town secure, and all of this. Each, like, I'm seeing like, you know, 4 or 5 different encounters that I could easily build out of this stuff before even dealing with like the hags. So yes. Here's my dirty little secret when it comes to miniatures. I don't really care about painting minis all that much. And I say that with hundreds of painted minis on my shelves. But these do represent characters, and that I care about a lot. When I paint a mini, I'm thinking about them. It's like I'm discovering who they are. Take this little goblin minion. His name is a book. Or at least that's his nickname. Because that's what the wizard would always say when pointing at him and asking him to fetch a book to hold during a ritual. Maybe a book is a minion. That's possible. Or maybe he's somewhat trusted by the wizard. Almost an accidental apprentice, learning what he can as the wizard casts his spells. Maybe he sets out on his own when the wizard disappears to find his teacher and... I'm pretty sure I just created a backstory for a goblin wizard. So that's the fun part for me. Not the painting part, but what comes out of it. So right now I'm working through this purple worm. It's gonna have a raft on it with a sail. It's all for this crazy game at Gen Con. Details on the screen, check it out. I'm also excited about this worm in progress because it gives me the chance to tell you guys about one of my favorite crafting channels. I based this purple worm off of a design and tutorial video by Tabletop Witchcraft. This is not the first of his designs I've referenced. My stronghold? That's his design. My sewers, or as much of them as I finished, his design. These awesome fancy floor tiles, this tree, now this purple worm. His work is incredible. Head on over and subscribe to Tabletop Witchcraft on YouTube. You do that, and I'm gonna sit here trying to figure out how to stick a raft on this thing. Probably with magnets. Yeah. Wish me luck.
We start the story in your almost stereotypical type tavern. It's hustling and bustling, but this tavern in particular is currently on fire.
Which is expected when the tavern is on the elemental plane of fire. Their contact hands the party a scroll and says, "Now for the tricky part."
As they grab the scroll, they look at it and realize that it's a bounty for themselves. They take a quick glance around the room and realize every single eye is on them.
Fleeing the tavern, the group is nearly burned, but makes it to the portal and
As they get to the portal, they realise there's a strange figure standing in their way.
This won't do it all. 894 tests, and you always run. Disappointing. Maybe one more loop. Let's start back at the tavern.
We start the story in your almost stereotypical type tavern. It's hustling and bustling.
I left quite a mess in my workshop last week when I was finishing my terrain for Gen Con. Now that I'm back, I thought I'd talk about my experience while I clean up a bit. First, everything with the terrain and the actual play on stage went great. No complaints there at all. In terms of Gen Con itself, it was my first time, and I didn't like it very much. It's partly my fault, because I didn't prepare for it. I had blinders on until the game with my terrain in it was all done. Once I had a chance to check out the conference, I was overwhelmed. It was a lot of people. I heard upwards of 85,000 tickets were sold. There were so many big brands there. I like supporting indie creators, and I was frustrated trying to seek them out. But I don't want to be all negative. I'll prepare myself better for next year, and I'm sure I'll have more fun. In the meantime, here are some fun indie creators. Some were at Gen Con, and I missed them, and others I've learned of since then. Please support them if you can. I'm so thrilled to talk about the terrain I made for Gen Con this year. The game had a fun set of players, and it went sort of like this.
Designed, handcrafted by Ryan Immel. Look at this goblin cart, it's wonderful.
Yeah, Ryan, come design my life.
The one-shot had them racing through the wasteland on a wagon they customized. They chose between a Clockwork horse and a baby worm to pull it. Also a ballista, a booster on the back straight out of Looney Tunes, and these crystal shelves. Even the wheels are magnetized. Then they raced and fought a Clockwork war machine, a flying arcane boat, and a sailboat on the back of a purple worm. There are so many fun little details that I love. The wizard's boat has this floating crystal. The war machine has a rotating gear on top and magnetized walls for these little minions. The sailboat on the worm, it looks like the spikes on the worm are holding it in place. I can't wait to run my own sessions with this terrain. For now, it all gets a special place on the shelf. I think I've found my favorite way to make a sail on a ship. I've made a couple of ships, and one thing is always consistent: no sails. Yeah, they're hard. It's a tough combination of goals. You want a certain wavy shape, but you also want it to look like it's made of a soft material. While building crazy wagons for the game at Gen Con, I stumbled into this method. The trick is using paper, brown like this or any color really, cut a certain way, and then wrapping it in cheesecloth. I cut the paper into a triangle shape and make sure it's larger than the supports. I use toothpicks to glue it to the supports. Since the paper is larger, this forces it into a bit of a curve. Then I wrap the cheesecloth around it and use a little super glue on each edge. The edges can use a trim, as much or as little as what looks good. The whole thing is simple, but the end result holds a rigid shape and looks like it's made of cloth. Oh, and then I stuck it onto the back of this purple worm, but that part's a little bit more complicated. I want to talk about this campaign planning idea shared by That Blue-Haired DM. This idea of the big sentence.
Boil down your campaign plot to a sentence. And everything in this world, all the events lead to that sentence.
It's a fun video, link in the description. I took a look at my campaigns and wrote up some of my own big sentences. This one never really got off the ground, but I like the concept. Two wizards are locked in a cold war with each other that will soon destroy the city and the world. Here's the big sentence for my longest running campaign. An old forgotten god is walking around a mere mortal, but he will do anything to return to godhood. And here's the big sentence for my guild campaign. Actually, I better not. It might give some stuff away. If you really want to know, ask in the comments, and I'll find a way to share it privately. It's a good one.
I think when I think of bugbears, and this is maybe a disservice to bugbears, maybe I need to really revisit how I think about them. I just think about them being goblinoids. I think about their relationship to goblins. Whenever I have goblins in a game, I typically think about, okay, so who's managing these goblins? Who's keeping them in line? And depending on where my game is, if I want it to go more, if I want the enemies to be a little bit more strategic and militaristic, then I'll say hobgoblins. And if I want it to be maybe a little bit more wild and chaotic, I'll say bugbears. But I'm sure that there's more that I could do with bugbears if I really thought about it.
My favorite way to track monster hit points is using ranges. For example, a Bugbear is 5d8 plus 5, but as a range, that's 10 to 45. Under 10 points of damage, the Bugbear cannot go down. Over 45 points of damage, it must. In between, I'll make judgment calls to keep the game fun and engaging. If someone pulls off a particularly impressive hit, even if it only bumps into that range, I can make the call and take the monster down right there. Or, if the combat is a bit too easy and needs an adjustment on the fly, I can lean on the higher end of those hit point ranges to keep the fight fun. It's important to tweak the game while it's happening. Nobody's perfect, and neither is our session prep. Just don't tell my players.
So I ran a one-shot for my Wednesday night group last night. If I had to describe the best way to do one-shots, it's probably polite railroading, to be honest. If it's a one-shot that you intend to actually finish in one shot, you know, not only should you probably have a pretty good idea of like how that structure is going to look, but you should probably have trigger points throughout the night where you're like, if they don't get through this first act, then this is going to happen to propel them into the second act. And if they don't get through that amount of time, this will propel them forward. And I like polite railroading is a good term for it. That's a good way to put it, because that's kind of what it is. It's like, hey, listen. It's like, hey, for your own sake, I'm going to keep moving you forward so that you can find the fun.
Walk me through adding magnets. Totally. You got your two pieces, and I have magnets. These are, I think, like 3mm, something like that. This just helps me keep them all in the same orientation. Imagining that one of these is going to be the top and one of these is going to be the bottom. I'll just use the magnets themselves to push in an indentation, dig out some of that foam, and then I'll just check it usually visually to make sure that I've gone deep enough. Then I will put some hot glue in the hole, pull off the top, leave it in the exact same orientation, and drop it in. Just put a thin layer of hot glue over the top. So I'll take this piece, I'll use that magnet, take my top, align it, push in enough to make the same indentation, the same style that I did the other time. Every time I do magnets on a craft, I look for another craft I've already made that has like a base or has like, and then I do a stack of magnets just like that. So I just use all my previous work as reference. Yeah, I hope that helps. Hey, this is weird. I don't normally talk to the camera like this, but it felt right because now I've uploaded over 100 videos to my YouTube channel. When I started at the beginning of the year, I thought I'd make 100 videos before I really decided what's next. Simple goals. Since then, I've made terrain for Gen Con, collaborated with some awesomely talented people, and I crossed 1,000 subscribers. Unreal. And based on what people have sort of responded to, I think I know what's next in terms of content, and I've been working on it a lot, but it's not quite ready yet. However, if you're still watching, I've been building a Discord all about D&D and game design and puzzles and crafting, all the really good stuff. If you'd like to join, send me a note and I'll send you an invite. My Discord will be the first to hear about whatever I'm working on very soon. Promise. Taking notes during D&D is tough. It's messy and chaotic, and I'm not even a player really. I'm mostly a dungeon master. But I do recommend a certain style of note-taking to my players. Here it is. Proper nouns. It's all about the proper nouns. When you hear one, start a page, or better yet, a 2-page spread, and dedicate it to that name. Then, come back to that page anytime the name comes up during a session. Not every name will be the most important. Some names are just names. But when that one name keeps coming up, and then, about 8 levels later, you hear it again, and you can flip back in your notes and find 2 full pages you've written about it, you're on another level. Your knowledge will freak your dungeon master out. Okay, not really. They will be proud. As they should be. This stuff has saved me so much time when basing miniatures and making terrain. It's called Accelerator, and it's a spray that cures superglue in just a few seconds. Here's what I mean. I pin my minis, which just means I superglue pieces of paperclip into minis and then secure them through a hole in the base. Without the accelerator, I have to either hold it in place and wait, or prop it up on something. But when I use the accelerator, it's just a few seconds and it's cured. That wait time might not seem like much, but when you want to keep working and go straight from gluing to basing and then painting, yeah, that time is worth way more than the few dollars I spend on a bottle like this. So my wife ran her first one-shot the other day,
Hey, I'm Ashley. I'm Ryan's wife. I don't really run games that often, but I do have access to all of Ryan's terrain. So I decided to use all these kids' toys that I found around our house. I ran a one-shot called The Wild Sheep Chase, and it was really fun. Well, I kind of thought it was a little boring sometimes, but I'll get better. This was the sheep, and this was the evil wizard. These were the players, and maybe next time I'll try using some of Ryan's minis in terrain. I guess, if I have to.
I use D&D Beyond to manage my games, and it took me entirely too long to figure out this one simple thing. So I use it to run one-shots for my players, usually when we don't have a full group. Here's one called Dink's Got a Plan. It's a goblin heist one-shot, or Everyone Dies in the Swamp. That sort of explains itself. When I run these, I create a themed set of characters for players to choose from. But in D&D Beyond, handing over a character makes it that player's character. It's gone. You can get it back from them, but it's always complicated. So now, I always duplicate my characters first, before I put them into a one-shot campaign. That way, I always have the character to reuse however I want. It saves me a lot of time, and lets me create a lot more, I have a lot of characters in D&D Beyond. Okay, I have a question. I'm not sure our players ever notice the half-finished work we bring to the table. Even for crafting DMs and miniature painters, Dungeon Masters use unfinished work all the time. My question is, what terrain or mini do you use in your games, even though you know you never really finished it? I'll go first. These floating islands are not done. Not by a long shot. They need roots and dry brushing. A ton of detail is missing. And yeah, this one hurts. Even a bunch of my players' character minis need painted. This one is even broken, I guess. Ugh. Yeah. I need to go fix these right now. Good dungeon masters steal, right? We steal from everywhere. The key is to steal the idea and not get distracted by the execution. Here's one example. I'm a big fan of Lost. All through the first season, there are mentions of a black rock somewhere on the island. It sounds like something that an island would have. You probably know it when you see it, right? In the season 1 finale, it's revealed to be the name of a ship called the Black Rock, and it's mysteriously shipwrecked in the middle of the jungle. That was a good reveal back in 2005. Yikes. If we wanted to steal this, we wouldn't use Black Rock as a name. We wouldn't even use the idea of a ship stuck in the middle of the jungle, though that is cool. We steal the idea of a tribally defined term. Party moves into an area, and they begin to hear a name or a turn of phrase, and it sounds basic enough. Maybe they don't even question it when they hear it. But when they see what it really is, they realize they were missing the big picture. And that realization redefines their quest, or maybe even the whole adventure. That's how to steal an idea. This was another angle I recorded from while making that stop-motion video about hit point ranges. The discussion on that video was great. Some of you guys really made me think hard about how I run the game, and I love that. When DMs are designing encounters for a session, we're doing a lot of guesswork based on what we think would make the game fun or challenging or interesting. And sometimes, let's be honest, most of the time, that iteration on the session continues into the session itself. That said, I'm not aiming to choose when monsters go down. And I think this hits at the core tension that exists for most dungeon masters. We want to be challenging, we want to make a good experience for our players, but we also want to let the dice decide. One way I try to balance this out is by making sure that my monster HP gets locked in at the halfway mark. I typically let my players know when an enemy is bloodied. At that point, the HP is set, so to speak. Recording this animation took me about an hour. Took a lot longer to edit, but hey, at least I got it all in one take. Okay, D&D players. You can improve combat in your D&D games with just 4 words. And it doesn't take any extra prep work or knowledge about spells or anything like that. Here it is. Once you've rolled your attack or finished your action and you've made your movement, pick one of these things to say. Okay, that's my turn. That's it, I'm done. That's all for me. Or however you want to say it. It's a small thing, but now the DM doesn't have to pause and prompt you to find out if your turn is done. You know when your turn is done, right? And now everyone else at the table does too. And this round of combat just got a tiny little bit better. World building for your D&D game can really get out of hand quick. Like, I'm building out this calendar because my players asked how much time has passed in the game. I wrote down some names for the months, but I remember hearing that the names for our months come from the names for gods. So mine should probably be names for gods, right? I worked up a quick pantheon here, but then the gods come from culture, not the other way around. So I put together this cultural document, you know, the ethics of the society and everything. It's kind of long, but I was also reading about non-Gregorian calendars because maybe mine shouldn't have 12 months. Maybe it shouldn't even be a 24-hour day. Or maybe a non-lunar cycle, but what happens to ocean waves if there isn't a moon? Right, yeah. Let's say 6 months. Yeah, 6 months sounds good. Okay, hold up. Wait a second. How did nobody tell me about this? These toy popper things. It's silicone, so the paint goes in there, and then when it dries, you can just pop it out. My kids have been playing with this thing for years. Yeah, well, it's mine now. Next one-shot you run, try giving your players magic items without telling them what they do. I might start a one-shot with my players buying exotic items at a market. Maybe the seller's parent was an adventurer, and this was all their parents' stuff. They say, I know it all works, but some of this was, stolen, I think? Don't tell anybody, okay? The items have simple labels, but nothing that reveals what anything actually does. No time to test anything, because soon after the players buy stuff, the one-shot really gets going. So the players will have to find out what these items do by using them during the game. I mean, what could go wrong? You could say I've collected a few miniatures over the years. They fall into 3 main categories for me: big minis, small minis, and unpainted minis. For big minis, I keep them on shelves. Some are big enough to get a shelf of their own. For smaller minis, I use these clear plastic cases I found. I think they're meant for arts and crafts, but they fit most of my smaller minis perfectly. They're clear so I can see what's inside, and I can change the dividers around in different ways. Then for unpainted minis, those go into Ziploc bags. I label them with a Sharpie and try to keep similar things together. The goal is to go from here to the painted cases or even the shelf. But yeah, that will take a while. I'd love to run a game where each player has superpowers. Anybody remember Heroes? But like in the first season when it was still really great. I love the idea of strange abilities where heroes have to get creative to use them together in clever ways to complement each other. Maybe abilities start off mediocre and then evolve as you level up into something surprising. Yeah, this has to happen at some point. Here are things I never did before Dungeons & Dragons. I had never drawn world maps, or towns, or dungeons. I had never sculpted monsters out of clay and foam before. I had seriously never built ships and towers and mansions that are all playable inside. I had never drawn monsters, or written poetry, or turned that poetry into fake music that was really actually a puzzle. And I had never designed puzzle boxes or coded languages or props that reveal those coded languages. D&D is one of those rare hobbies that sort of unfolds into other hobbies. I love it, and I can't even begin to guess what will be next. There's a moment early on in Critical Role's first campaign that still inspires me. I still think about it. Matt Mercer is running his group through the Underdark. 2 players fly the magic carpet down and behind a waterfall. They want to find something cool. Now, I know, probably you know, there was never anything planned to be behind that waterfall. But in the moment...
And you see what looks like a pile of rags in the corner. The thing in the corner kind of rouses and then shoots up. Smooth head, purplish and blue in color, a series of tentacles in its mouth, a giant scar drawn across one of its eyes, and it looks filthy, and it looks desperate. And just and looks at the two of you.
Matt later confirmed his original plans changed in order for that to happen. DMs have to plan, but plans can change. The end result of our collaboration at the table, that's all that counts.
How did you find me?
I love this one-shot concept where the players are random commoners saving a town themselves. Somewhere out there is a town that our players didn't bother to save, right? That one leftover quest on the notice board. That's the town being attacked. And even the sheriff just went down fighting off the rampaging bridge troll. So the players draw a random member of town, an improvised weapon, and go try to be heroes. And then, of course, redraw when their commoner goes down, like, immediately. If your players defeat the troll, their characters are folk heroes now. Maybe even the start of a new campaign. Or maybe they hunt down your original party, seeking answers as to why their town didn't get saved. Let's talk about where to find miniatures. Most of my collection is stuff I purchase from local game stores. I prefer unpainted, but I have some pre-painted minis too. I also love harvesting minis from board games. The quality varies from game to game, but the hunt is part of the fun. In some cases, I've made minis. Some simple, some a little more elaborate. Flat minis are another option, especially to get a lot of minis at once. I'm a big fan of Hero Forge and other mini customizer tools. Etsy is a great place for printed stuff. Then there's 3D printing, that's what I do now. It's a bit of an investment, but if you want enough minis, it's probably a smart way to go. In terms of where to start, my advice is always to follow whatever inspires you. Just know that, at some point, you probably have to paint them. Next time you take a picture of a mini, flip your phone upside down first. It puts the lens closer to the mini and gives you a better angle on its eye line too. Here's the same shot, first with my phone held normally, then again, but with my phone upside down. It's a small change, but I think it's worth the effort. I learned a lot watching Chris Perkins run the Acquisitions Incorporated D&D game, but I want to talk about this moment from their 2010 Christmas special. The players have asked some questions about the room that they're in, and in the midst of describing it, Perkins just opts to show them his map, and the players react like this.
On your level.
Look at this shit-heel's hand
Did you know?
map.
I want to make sure. Did you draw
camera?
the stone in there? Did you?
Yeah.
I did all the
OCD.
I totally did.
We talked about it before. I want you to look at this. He made all of this by hand for us to pretend and play. Now he even went hard on the rubble.
Now these are artists, dungeon masters, super talented people in their own right. I saw that, and I knew I wanted to be the type of dungeon master that could get that kind of reaction from my table.
So the dude is here.
Okay.
Basically.
It's weird what sticks with you. I always start campaigns off with character prologues. I run them as one-on-one sessions with each player before the campaign really kicks off. That way, players get a feel for the world, try their characters out, and connect with NPCs. For instance, my bard ran into alligator trouble while doing odd jobs around town. The fighter had a nightmare and flashed back to his time in the war. The monk fought in the local boxing ring, which reminded him of the time he fought a giant scorpion. The druid went on a walkabout and actually decided on their circle during the same session. And the rogue snuck into a mansion which ended up belonging to the campaign's big bad. Solo play can be challenging to run, and it takes some time to do a session for each player, but it is totally worth it. I craft with foam, and I end up with a lot of scrap pieces. I stack it up, but it just ends up in a pile. It never looks great. But I found this thing, it's called an art storage rack. It's meant for canvases and paintings, but it actually holds my foam scrap okay. Yeah, I think I'll try this out. So my players have been leveling up, getting to that next tier of play. You know what that means. My damage rolls are gonna need more dice. Yeah, that should be a good start. I've always wanted to make Baba Yaga's hut, and I sort of did, at least a prototype of it. I had a game that needed the Walking Witch's hut, so I quickly put this together. I used a couple of those dollar store dollhouse facades, and I magnetized those to planks I added on this wood panel, which is also from the dollar store. The legs are armature wire, aluminum foil, and DAS clay. The paint job is super rushed, but I did all of this in about a day and a half. I learned a lot on this build, and there's a bunch of stuff I want to improve. A smaller base, thinner legs, and my own custom witch's house on the top. This is what an early idea looks like. Yeah, let's make a better one. Watching Critical Role's first campaign, this was the moment I knew I had to be a dungeon master. For a while there, Critical Role would run these character introductions at the beginning of every session. Grog likes ale, Scanlan likes pike, and Percy's parents were killed by...
Lord and Lady Briarwood came to court.
That's right. After seeing these intros about a dozen times, this happens.
Snaps twice, and the gentleman comes by and he hands them papers and says, "Get these to Lady and Lord Briarwood as soon as possible, thank you." All right, so...
That sort of character moment, where it's small but huge, and you can miss it, but if you're paying attention, you can pick up on it. That was the good stuff. It's like a twist in a movie or a TV show, but you get to live it.
But if I could be notified, very much like to surprise them.
For the sake of this conversation, I'm going to ask you to roll a deception check.
Okay.
I had to try to make that happen at my table.
Natural 20.
On the new pretty die.
Don't fuck with me.
Try planning your D&D sessions from the center out. Start with the interactions your players can have, and then fit them into the world. That's how I designed a recent session I ran. I have 4 players, and they were set to steal something from an auction house. My halfling bard has a bit of a romance with a dwarven politician. I'll make sure she's invited. My tiefling rogue definitely wants to sneak and break into rooms he shouldn't be in, so plenty of security and tricky doors. My Warforged barbarian would love to see exotic weapons and armor sets, so some of those will be up for auction. And for the human sorcerer, let's say a strange magical aura surrounds the building. Maybe something really exotic, and magic items on auction, of course. I still have a lot of planning to do, but this helps me frame out the ideas. It's a good place to start. When I start a campaign, I ask each player to write and send me rumors about their characters. The rumors can be true, or kind of true, or completely false. Then, I send the rumors to each of the other players, so everyone has heard something, true or not, about everyone else. This does 2 great things in an early campaign. 1, it gets players thinking about how their characters are perceived and what others might already think of them. 2, and this is key, it gives players something to talk to one another about in character. Maybe they want to ask Charlotte about this rumored gambling problem, or if Cade really names all of his chef knives. If prologue sessions are to help players find their place in the world, I'd say these early game rumors help them get a feeling for each other's place in the world. And that makes the world feel just a little bit more real. In case you need an airship for your game on short notice like I did, check out this toy. I found it on Amazon, and it wasn't exactly cheap, but it was here quickly, so I was able to assemble it in time for my session. It's about the perfect size for minis, and it's solid. I have plans to modify it and spruce it up, but I haven't gotten to that part yet. When I do, you guys will definitely hear about it. Now let's just hope my players don't crash and total it in our game before I finish all the upgrades, because that has happened before. I survived running a birthday one-shot for 4 11-year-old boys and 2 dads. I did it by pairing off the players and running things a little differently. So the game was chaotic, which I expected, wonderfully chaotic. I ran my Harry Potter one-shot, set during the first term after the Battle of Hogwarts. With 6 players and only 2.5 hours to play, I was nervous about getting through everything. So, I paired up the players. I made 3 student character sheets and let their partners pick a familiar. Each pair worked as a team, rolling and making decisions together.
This worked really well, especially with the parents as familiars letting the kids run the students. After all of that, we finished in one night with time to spare. The boys loved it, and they asked for a regular game, but I might not be ready for that quite yet. Oh, and just a random thought, teachers should be paid more. Like, a lot more. My paint shelf desperately needs to be organized. This is all wrong. So while I do that, let's talk about miniature paints and supplies. For crafting, you want to go cheap. Painting foam, cardboard, stuff like that. The cheap acrylics are great. But for painting miniatures, you want miniature paints. They are pricier, but trust me, you need them. And they're worth it. I use all the different brands. Game Color, Army Painter, Citadel. I'll use any of them. Pick up one of the starter kits if you want, or a few individual paints at your local game store that grab your attention. Definitely browns, earthy colors, and some metallics would be great in the beginning. Get a cup for paint water and a palette for your paints. I like these painting handles by Citadel. Nice brushes are awesome, but don't spend a bunch of money on these things right at the beginning. Aside from the paints, honestly, go cheap wherever you can. You can always spend more money later once you know what it is you actually need. And there, that looks better. Let's design an encounter in a vault filled with cursed gold that duplicates when it's touched. Once inside the vault, the party finds a room with rare magic items and more gold than they've ever seen in person. Once they find what they broke in for, they will probably take their share of the gold. Why not, right? Let's fill those pockets, or maybe even their bag of holding. Each armful is 200 gold pieces. In moments, they notice their pockets bursting apart. The gold is getting heavier. Oh, and some of it is animating in the corner, forming into a treasure golem that attacks them. And every d4 rounds, it doubles in size, while the vault fills with more and more gold around them. If the party escapes, I'd let any gold they have lose its curse and stop duplicating. I'm nice like that. Oh, but a bag of holding will explode into the astral plane at around 25,000 gold pieces, or 6 rounds of duplicating, depending on how much they filled it with, just in case you need that information. I'll let you guys in on my secret. So I make stuff for my games, and the table where I run is right next to the space I craft in. It's super easy to see over here and see what I'm working on, so what I do, I keep monsters I'm working on up here, so my players don't know what I'm working on for their game. Unless they watch this video. Shoot. I love weak magic items. Complex and powerful magic items are great, but clever trinkets can show up anywhere, and they're a fun source of world building. My favorite resource for years has been this simple website by a thoughtful DM named Len. Select an item type, how many you want, and roll the dice. I have used this as the starting point for so many magic items in my games. The bearer of the Vigilant Ring gains +2 to their passive perception. Once attuned, the bearer always knows the exact location of this amulet. These are so great for sparking new item ideas. Len has also provided a view of the tables that power these random items, if you want to read through that. It's a wonderful little site. So thank you, Len, wherever you are. Your weak magic items have helped to fill the pockets and the treasure chests and the tombs that my players have enjoyed looting for years. The Reaper's Quiver gives advantage on death saving throws. It just makes me want to write the lore behind an item like that. Who owned it? So cool. I'm not sure anything has transformed my perspective on tabletop game design quite like Matt Colville's video on action-oriented monsters. In fact, I've been a little nervous about making this video just because I don't want to do it a disservice. In short, imagine that monsters had more interesting things to do than attack, like a goblin boss that can command his minions to attack, or an Ankeg that pulls a player down into its tunnel. I'm a big fan of Matt and MCDM and all their work, but if I'm honest, I've been most looking forward to their monster book, Flee Mortals. Flipping through the pages is kind of like rediscovering D&D monsters. I like how the undead section groups zombies and ghosts together because they're usually going to be used in the same session, and this way DMs have to flip around through fewer pages. This book has like 9 different types of goblins and a shambling pile to go with the shambling mound. I've only scratched the surface of this book, and it's already a part of my weekly session prep. I made this building out of foam and cardboard for my D&D campaign. This lodge served as the headquarters of the party's guild, which they named the Order of the Eternal Flame. So the entrance is adorned with these stone flames. From the start, the campaign was about the players resurrecting an old guild that the world had forgotten about.
This whole thing is modular and built with the players in mind. The half-orc ex-soldier Grumbach preferred a corner in the cellar to sleep, so I made sure that was there. The elven druid River sleeps outside, but she does have a hammock hanging from the rogue's window. I love the idea of a home base for a campaign, whatever form it takes. Something that changes with the campaign, sort of mirroring the group's progress. In this case, it turned out the guild was run by a 1,000-year-old lich. Once the party figured that out, the campaign pivoted into destroying him and the guild they helped to reestablish. So I guess this is both their home base and also the lair of the big bad evil guy. I like that. If something is important, you give it a name. That's why I name all of my D&D campaigns. Each binder gets a name and the most relevant map on the front cover. These binders help me keep multiple campaigns somewhat organized all at once. When I run out of space in one binder, I start a second one, or a third, or, well, you know how it goes. I wouldn't be the dungeon master I am without Goosebumps. I used to just devour these books as a kid. I loved the artwork, I loved the stories. My favorites were the Give Yourself Goosebumps, the Choose Your Own Adventure style of books. These pages were for tracking inventory as you read through the book. I loved the horror, I loved the twists, and I was a little author, writing my own stories in grade school and printing them out on dot matrix printers. I have bought, sold, and given away a lot of books over the years, but I still have every one of my old Goosebumps books. These Goosebumps covers are so inspiring. I bet I could come up with an idea for D&D just by looking at these covers. Let's find out. You know what? That was easier than I thought. This is Cornelius Goldfoot, the minor villain behind the first mystery arc I ever wrote for D&D. Cornelius was a genius inventor, but he held a grudge against his hometown of Hillbottom. He used his clockwork robots to seek revenge on the city, and made sure to leave evidence behind pointing toward other inventors. The players investigated, and they guessed wrong. They were tricked, and they turned in the wrong inventor. But Cornelius, in his hubris, tried to tie off loose ends by banishing the players to the Underdark, except the players pulled him down with them. He then convinced them they should all travel together to escape. That was until he saw his opportunity and made a deal with a doppelganger which briefly replaced him. There may have been a false Hydra down there too, I don't really remember. He fled, the players caught up to him. Long story short, unfortunately Cornelius never made it out of the Underdark. But it was an incredibly fun and memorable part of the campaign, and now every time I use this mini, I think of Cornelius. I like something to hold my minis in place while I paint. There are cheap and expensive options for this. These guys are Citadel paint handles. They sort of grip the mini base, and then you hold the handle while you paint. They come in different sizes. This big one works for larger monsters like this nasty beholder. But in the past, I've just used corks. Corks plus a little bit of blue tack. Just smush it all on there and you're good to go. I still keep a bunch of corks around, especially if I'm painting a bunch of minis all at once. Like a dozen beholders. Just kidding. Maybe I'm kidding. It's not the worst idea, right? I'll have to think about that. Even with no magnets, this might be the most satisfying set of terrain I've made for D&D. I can't help but just play around with it and make all these different configurations. I made these because my players were headed to the desert, and I wanted to represent a temple sticking up out of the sand. I already had tiles for the dungeon itself, but there was going to be a big battle on the surface before they made it inside. They're made out of XPS foam of various thicknesses.
The big pieces are surprisingly complex to make. It took me a while to get all the angles right so that they fit together, but when they do, it is so satisfying. With this set, I was able to represent my temple in the desert. I've also used this set as a jungle temple entrance and even barbarian ruins at one point. They're super flexible, and I love that. Honestly, it would be fun to make more of them sometime. Maybe I will. At least I wouldn't have to figure out all these weird angles again. I used to hate brainstorming. Brainstorming works if you already have ideas, but it's painful if you don't, which seems backwards. It was only a few years ago that I discovered disruptive brainstorming. So if I'm stuck planning out a session or a campaign, first I'll write down all the cliche ideas and the tropes that I can think of. Stuff I don't want to use. Defend a town from goblins. The party is shipwrecked. Next step, we skew those ideas and make them absurd in some way. We adjust the scale, the conditions, the perspective, whatever. Defend a town from goblins becomes protect goblins from an attacking town. The party is shipwrecked becomes the party can't find dry land. The more we skew these ideas, the more they bring us to new places. This all works for my brain. Maybe it'll work for yours too. I'm just gonna take this one real quick. Yeah, I want this one. The first piece of terrain I ever made was this little stone fountain, and I still use it at least once a month. It works in so many settings, town squares, in an old dungeon, you can put it anywhere. So I made this probably 4 years ago, following a tutorial video by Black Magic Craft. If you look closely, you can probably spot other things in my collection that I made following tutorial videos on his channel. The great part about this fountain build is all you really need is foam core, the white paper stuff, an X-Acto blade, and maybe some cheap epoxy resin for the water effects. You could use hot glue for the water effect too. A little cutting, a little gluing, some texture with this aluminum ball, and some painting. If you're at all curious about crafting terrain, search Black Magic Craft Fountain on YouTube. Just remember what happens if you find that you really enjoy crafting. You might end up needing a dedicated shelf, or 5 dedicated shelves. Give your NPCs a break. Tell stories with your environment instead. Let's say an assassin was the last person to use this room at the inn, and we want the players to be able to figure it out. First, we put a tricky lockbox under the bed, with a disguise and a lot of gold inside. There are also small scratches on the floor where it was pulled out. Next, the assassin stored their poison components in the drawer, leaving tiny pieces behind. The lingering smell will deal 1 point of damage to any player that takes a big whiff. Their contract was written in invisible ink, so a blank parchment sits on the table next to melted blue candle wax. Finally, the innkeeper asked the players for help. Room 4 hasn't been paid up, has been gone for days, and the skeleton key doesn't work on their door anymore. At this point, only a lockpick or a climb through the window will get them in. And in case all of that isn't enough, after a while, a stranger enters the room. They came to check on the assassin they hired, and why they never finished the job. This is awkward, isn't it? I use Milestone Leveling, and it's made me a better game designer. It's probably also why my games last for years. Experience points can be fun to track in a bookkeeping sort of way, but I like when groups level up after some big in-game achievement. So I start players at level 1 in solo Prologue Sessions. After that first session, they're level 2. I try to find milestones roughly after the same number of sessions as the level up. So 3 more sessions, they're level 3. 4 more, level 4, and so on. The first adventure is short. Maybe they save a little kid from goblins. By level 10, that arc is a lot more complex, maybe dealing with a whole town overrun by a coven of witches. Designing this way is a fun challenge and really satisfying when it all works out. But those later level ups could take months, meaning a campaign could take years to finish. Sounds like fun to me. I really should plan a whole campaign dedicated to time travel. I love time travel stories. Back to the Future, Tenet, Loki. I played a board game once called Time Stories. The players time travel, but then get pulled back, so they're limited in their action. Oh,
Right, so in one of my games, the sorcerer exploded and sent herself into an alternate future.
Email this to your grandma.
Another time, a group traveled through the Feywild and lost a week, and then later a year. What if a game was all about time travel? It would need new mechanics. You know what would be cool? Is a special campaign map. Let's see. A map, but it's really a complex set of shifting timelines that would be so, shoot. Wait, as much as time travel shows up in my D&D campaigns, I really should plan a whole campaign. Well, this is cool. So I'm Ryan Immel DM, and I'm a bit of a collector. Miniatures, terrain, terrible decisions to put in front of my players. You get the idea. But lately I've been collecting something that I didn't know I even wanted. This is clips of people I look up to saying my screen name wrong.
Ryanime, obviously, we aim to please. We considered, when we built the studio, we were like, listen, there's a chance we might attract Ryanime. What are we going to do to keep them invested? And I was like, spinning dice. And it was basically unanimous. Everybody was like, yeah, he's going to love it.
Ryan Me DM. Or Ryan Lamel DM. Yeah, it's the same thing. People, actually teaching brand.
I didn't know I needed this in my life. But if you guys know where I can find any more like that, please send it my way.
Ryanime.
Pretty sure I'm hooked. The single most interactive piece of terrain in my collection has to be trees, actually. Yep, it's just trees. Few things will inspire your players to say, I climbed that tree, as much as having a tree out on the table, and they just need to be climbable. The first trees I ever used were these cheap ones I found online, but they aren't very climbable, so I upgraded. I followed Blackmagic Craft's tutorial on making trees out of scrub pads and dowel rods. Pretty climbable, and tall, which is a plus. Then I started experimenting with these Woodland Scenics armatures and adding magnets with little forest bases. Also climbable. The only other tree I've made is this crazy behemoth following Tabletop Witchcraft's tutorial. I can stick a dragon up there. I can run a whole combat up here. I can fit other trees, and then those are climbable too. And, what were we talking about again? I think trees are great. Put some trees on your table. This one idea improves every monster encounter I design. The monsters know what they're doing. In his book, Keith Amon uses stat blocks and lore to create a set of monster tactics. For example, a dark mantle, these cave squids. Using only the monster manual, I might have had it drop from the ceiling and cast magical darkness using darkness aura, since that's what it suggests. And then, probably while running the encounter, I realize, that's it. My monster is out of actions and it hasn't even attacked. Now the players will probably get the first shot, and it doesn't have a lot of hit points. Shoot. But Keith suggests the Dark Mantle is an ambush predator. It picks a low ceiling and casts magical darkness from there. Then it waits a round before it drops and attacks with advantage. It has no reason to move until it's ready to attack. I love this insight. It makes me excited to run an encounter with a Dark Mantle. Or maybe 10 of them. We'll see. I love that moment when new players get the game. You know, when they understand what D&D is and what it can be. My favorite example might be when Mike Krahulik, the artist behind Penny Arcade, refused to play D&D at work with his friends.
Guys, this is my first time rolling.
For real?
For real, I've never...
They had to pay him just so he would try the game out. And for the first hour at the table, goblins were kicking their butts.
Only because he's prone that misses.
This is the worst party.
I set him up for
you. You guys actually get together and do this for fun?
Right towards the end of combat, this happened.
All right, you decapitate him.
With a maul, which is actually hard to do.
Yes.
All right, now I see why you guys play.
All right.
We killed some goblins.
I love that. Especially how he went on to play Jim Dark Magic for years, and he's an amazingly creative DM. So I will take every chance I get to introduce new players to the game. To see these sorts of moments, this game is just the best. I use this house rule in every campaign I run, and I just found a way to make it even better. I Know a Guy is a clever house rule created by David Nett. It lets a player create an NPC they used to know, like an old friend, and use that NPC to get the group out of a jam, like The monk has a friend in the next town that can hide the players from bandits. Or the druid's friend was a big history buff and definitely has a book on this long-forgotten cult. I love it, but my players don't use it enough. Or maybe they just wait to save it for the right time, which got me thinking. What if I gave one of these to each player when a campaign starts? When they use I Know a Guy, they can open it. The monk's friend in town was also repairing a weird old quarterstaff for them. And the druid's friend had prophetic nightmares, including one about the druid they were never willing to reveal. It's a simple idea, but I think it would work. I mean, who can resist a secret inside a sealed envelope? This is the worst thing about me as a DM. Well, it's the worst thing I'm aware of. I won't run a session unless every player can attend. Yeah. Now, I could say it's due to balance issues, or that it's weird when characters disappear from the story, but really, it just demotivates me. I spend a lot of time on my campaigns. Arguably, too much time. Character moments, complex plots, plus I build things for big set-piece moments. Running a player down is fine at first, but over time, I know it will impact me, and I don't want to burn out on my games. Sometimes I'll run one-shots instead of the campaign, or my players can run one, or we can play a different game. But at the end of the day, we miss out on games more often because of my rule. And I think I'd be a better DM if I changed. Let's scale this encounter up until it's impossible. So the players are facing one goblin. Too easy. Let's make it tougher with more hit points. And a hand axe for more damage than a club. A few more goblins could help. They can be tactical, like taking higher ground to shoot arrows down. Maybe they built pit traps the players have to avoid. Oh, and the goblins are minions of this cult. Necromancers that can bring one minion back to life each round. They captured these townsfolk that need saving, and it's all suspended over this endless pit. In 3 rounds, the cult will finish the summoning ritual using these magic spires. Strange, winged creatures fly out of the portal every round and attack. They swoop down and curse the player's weapons. Also, everything's on fire. Yeah, that should be pretty... Oh, and the ritual summons a Cthulhu monster. There, that should do it. I think I made all of these props because I grew up loving these props. Back in the 90s, Kevin McAllister was the coolest kid. So I wanted the Talk Boy. It looked and worked just like his did in Home Alone 2. It felt like more than a toy. I could see it, exactly this, in the movie. I also love this creative and ridiculous VHS case. Just like the movie, I could turn the key and pretend anything in the cupboard or the box the tape came in came to life. Even as I grew older, I collected these replica poker chips from Casino Royale. The movie makes the prop special, and having the prop makes the movie even better. So maybe it was only a matter of time before I wanted to make this wizard skull that reveals hidden messages in my game, or these puzzle stones that fit together with magnets. I want the game to make the prop special, and using the prop to make the game even better. This is the best bridge terrain I've ever found. It's $8, and it's supposed to be a dollhouse fence. But all you need is something strong to cut them with so you can take off the picket edge. Then you have a bridge. Twist and cut the wire based on how long you want the bridge to be, or combine them for a really long bridge. I save the extra wood planks because you never know. So I've made my own walkways before with popsicle sticks, and they're great, but it's hard to beat a cheap option like this. I made these cave tiles with little posts so I can wrap the wire around it. Another time they were mystically suspended in between these astral islands. Mystical magnets. I've always wondered what it would look like painted up like a proper rope bridge, and it's pretty cool. Now I might have to paint and texture all my bridges like this. Honestly, it looks great either way. I love these things. Probably the best money I've ever spent on a craft. If you give me 2 NPCs in this one, the DM's telling me this guy's so funny. And over here, this NPC has an odd collection of acorns. I'm infinitely more interested in this person with a weird collection than I am with this like, oh, this really funny, hilarious NPC. But my biggest tip for good NPCs, and this is, I think, super, super important, funny is not a character trait. Funny is a judgment that people can make about a character, but it's not a character trait that you can apply to them. Same goes for handsome, charming. If you describe your character as funny or as brave, it does this weird thing in other people's minds where they go, huh, okay, well, we'll see. Like, I'll judge that. And now they're actually probably going to judge it harsher than they would otherwise. An NPC or a character being funny, that's not a trait. If the NPC thinks they're funny, that's a trait. But that also is like, you see how if that becomes a personality almost in and of itself. Funny is kind of like scary. It's really hard to control those things. They just sort of happen. There's one thing about mimics in 5th edition that annoy me. The monster manual says their attack is called pseudopod. It's always just kind of like been annoying to me. I don't think that's the right. I've always stumbled over that whenever I reference that, in a session, and I just like improvise my own description for the attack because I'm sure technically it describes something which is accurate to what's going on, but not my preferred action word in that case. I can't say that I have an established mimic lore in my games. Like, I don't necessarily know the ecology of these things. Like, I don't have anything that I care about. So do they procreate? Do they split like chromosomes? And I don't know much about these things. Nothing I feel too strongly about yet, so anything's possible. Pseudopod just doesn't do it for me. There was a strange wall. The tavern was sort of built around it, and basically standing near it, hearing places in the world above. It was almost like a tuning fork, but stone. Effectively, it allowed them to use this as like entertainment. So sometimes they would be able to connect almost like radio waves to like other venues, or there were little mentions here and there that the players even recognized of different locations they've been to. It can be difficult, but I like to try to think up something unique about every tavern. What makes this tavern memorable? Or just some quirk about it that then everything kind of hangs on that. Be kind of fun to have a tavern keep that's a bit of a miser, maybe cynical, recognizes that people travel through, will ask a lot of questions. Maybe there's a question menu. He's like, oh, you got something to say? Okay, great. 2 gold. What do you want to know? Yeah, you can ask as many questions as you want. I'll keep your tab running. It also doesn't mean that the innkeeper has to know the answers. It's a good way to make enemies with a party, I think. This is the cheapest way I know to add drama to combat encounters. When the big boss of the combat is low on hit points, maybe 5 or 10 points, tell your players. Seriously, tell them it has 5 hit points left. The characters in the world can see, so it's okay if the players know, but it's important they know the number. They need to know that it's only 1 hit away from being down. Then every decision the players thought they were going to make on their turn will be reconsidered. Healing everyone was the safe bet, but maybe it's worth risking an attack now. And every time a player misses, it's going to ratchet up the tension in a real way. As the DM, you're basically handing your players the big moment. Instead of telling them when the enemy is down, they know what it takes now. Everyone will be watching for that next attack roll and celebrating as soon as they know it's a hit. And that is an awesome feeling to give your players.